Hello everyone. Today we are going to look at how to export an InfraWorks model into formats that you can open in 3ds Max or Rhino or similar software for rendering purposes in your project. We did tutorial 1 on creating the campus map of UC, and in tutorial 2 we looked at how to create a new model from scratch. In both, we created the University of Cincinnati model, site model. So today we are going to look at exporting the entire model or a part of the InfraWorks model you may have into usable formats in 3ds Max. We are going to look at the utility tab here, which lists all the items that are currently shown here. You can turn on or off these layers to choose what you export for your exporting the InfraWorks model for use in other programs. For now, by default, all these layers are turned on. I'm going to leave it that way. I'm going to go ahead and close this. So that's where you turn on and turn off layers if you want to do that. I'm going to zoom into a particular area here to see what I want to export. So let's say I want to export this area here that is probably going to get developed in the future. And I'm wanting to bring this into 3ds Max. So when I click on this street, you get the corresponding menu that opens to show what the detail of this area is. So I click on this street. I know that this is Austin Terrace. I'm going to click on this. I know this is Digby. So I'm going to get an area that is between Probasco and Jocelyn and Digby and Austin Terrace. So to export this area, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Settings and Utilities tab. When I choose this, you get all these options of settings and utilities in InfraWorks. You can compare this to the Edit Preferences model, Edit Preferences options, rather, in InDesign or Illustrator, or file options in Word or in Photoshop to set up what you want to export or make changes to your existing template files or things like that. The settings and utilities here performs a similar function. In here, there are a number of options that are available. You can explore these things if you would like. But what we are interested in here is to export a 3D model of an area. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and I get the option window for exporting a 3D model file. Let's look at this window here. You can choose, if you have been working on this file for a while, you can choose what you recently selected as a window to export. You can also choose by default an entire model, and by choosing that, it will turn off some of the other features on this window, which you can see here. Right now, under coordinates, it's X and Y at 0. When I choose the entire model, it gives you the extents of the model on X and Y in the Cartesian coordinate system. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to select an area of this large University of Cincinnati campus. There are two ways to handle this. One is a polygon, which you can use any number of sides to select an area. So the other option is a bounding box, which is basically a rectangular box that you choose from one corner to the other corner. So in this case, I want the areas between the 4 streets here. So I'm going to choose, because I know it's a rectangular area, I'm going to choose a bounding box. So when I choose a bounding box, it changes, it removes the window, and now I have the option. I'm panning on it to position myself. It's best to do that in a plan view. So I'm going to try to get to my plan view here. And then I'm going to left click on one side and come on to the other side. And while I do that, it shows you the latitude and longitude of the area that we are looking at. So I'm going to select here and over here. Now you might notice that I'm selecting a little bit further outside the road. I'll tell you why in just a moment. So I'm going to select this area and double click. So now I have a bounding box that has chosen from the coordinate system on the left top corner, minimum, to the right bottom corner, which is the maximum, and the corresponding y coordinates for that. Now, if you have a very large file and you have created extents that you want to export, you can load that area from here as extents. Now let's look at this coordinate system here. By default, it is a UTM coordinate system that is used by InfraWorks. This coordinate system corresponds to most other GPS softwares that will use the same coordinate system. So if I'm using this file in ArcGIS or Map3D or things like that, or programs like that, it'll come in the correct geospatial orientation when you import this file into another program. Again, the origin here is the extent that I have chosen. And you can also choose a different coordinate system here. So if you're working if you want to use a different coordinate system, that is over here. Currently, I'm going to use meters because I'm getting it into 3ds Max. You can also use foot. You can choose many different coordinate systems here. So I'm going to use the default settings for now. We will get into the coordinate system requirements when you want to specifically export to a different coordinate system. The target files are saved usually in the default location where your InfraWorks file is located. It's usually in My Documents, InfraWorks, and it exports into that folder. Now I have chosen a different folder here, which you can change by selecting the browse icon to select where you want to save your file. I'm now also going to look at these options here that are useful in how you want to use your file. So by default, InfraWorks will export this whole area that has been selected by the bounding box into a single file, which means that all these houses, these roads, the landscape mesh, the road markings, and all these things will come in as one file. Now, in many cases, you don't want all these things in one file because maybe you don't want the houses, maybe you don't want the roads. So one of the ways to separate that is through multiple files, in which it'll provide you with the option of selecting all the ground areas and building areas as two individual files. So what this will do is it will export all the buildings into one file. It'll export all the ground into another file. You can also choose just to export the ground, and you can uncheck buildings and you'll get only ground. This saves you time if you want to delete the buildings. Or if you already have a terrain and you want just the buildings from InfraWorks in this coordinate system, you can uncheck the ground, use the buildings, and re-import it into the program. If your previous land data that you already have is in the same coordinate system, when you import this, it'll fall into the same place as your landscape file. The other options here are exporting materials and textures and merging objects with the same texture. Now, what does this do? All the roads here are mapped in InfraWorks with the material for roads. So what this option does here is that it merges all the road objects into a single layer, into a single object. That way, when it maps the material for the roads, it knows that all the objects that are merged for roadways have the same texture, and then these merged objects, the texture will be mapped onto these merged objects. The export materials and textures will provide you with swatches of the roadway material, the greenery material over here, where plants are usually trees or plants or decorative landscape items are placed, sidewalks. All these material textures are exported as swatches that then get correctly mapped into your 3D file. The large FBX support is something, FBX or film box file, which is native for 3ds Max. When you have large file support, when your InfraWorks area map is really, really large, the FBX file has certain components built into it to manage really large files, to load specific areas and not load the entire file. So if you're exporting a very large file, you want to check this option. Currently, I'm only doing a small area, so I'm going to leave it alone. So now I have selected all the things that I want to choose on how I want to export the file. In this case, I'm going to keep it as a single file. So I'm going to choose this radio button here for single file. I've chosen where this goes. I'm going to save this in the same location where I'm saving all these tutorials that I'm making. So I'm going to keep that folder as the same location. I'm going to select export, and InfraWorks immediately exports the file. So now let me go over here, and I'm going to open the folder where InfraWorks exported this file. So you can see here there is a export file, there is a POS file, which is a positioning file. So when I open this FBX file, the positioning file is linked to this file through code and metadata, and it links itself to open correctly in other mapping softwares, for example, 3ds Max, or for example, Esri or ArcGIS. I'm going to open 3ds Max so that I can open this file in it to see what our export looks like. While that is opening, let's look at a few more things here. Now we remember in the view item, there is a wireframe option that you can choose that we covered in previous tutorials. Now I'm expecting that my exported model is going to look something like this, because this is the real wire mesh that is being used to map textures onto this for landscape and buildings. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck the wireframe and close this. Let's see if 3ds Max loaded. Okay, there we go. We have 3ds Max, and I'm going to open the file that I just exported, the IM export. IM stands for InfraWorks Model Export FBX file. You can rename this file, but make sure you also rename the positioning file if you do that. I'm going to open the file, and by default it's 3ds Max file. I'm going to select all files here. Now I'm going to open this FBX file here. Now when I open this, it provides an option with the properties of the file that I'm trying to open. So the file creator was the plugin, FBX plugin, that is installed in InfraWorks by default, that is here. And it shows you the metadata of the file, and the file units is in meters. And it shows you what are all the elements that are here. There are 21 textures that have been mapped. This is the roadways, the houses, the lane markings, the sidewalks, the lawns, all those things. 16 materials. These textures are probably buildings. These materials are probably road textures. and these elements are some of the closed elements that are in here. So this is what is in here. So I'm going to keep the all the settings default here. Z is up, which is fine. Z axis is up in the up direction, which is correct. So I'm going to say OK, and here we go. You have the model in 3ds Max, and I'm going to zoom into these to see. You can see here that all the roadways, you can see in blue, all the roadways with similar texture have been merged. All the, let's see, all the lane markings have been merged. The same texture has been applied to the rooftops to show white. And so these, the rooftops and the lane markings have been merged by default by InfraWorks because it is the same texture. And you can see here that all the buildings, the texture mapping has been done. Also the landscape, all the texture mapping for the landscape is also done. And you can rotate to make sure that your terrain model is correct. You can see the slopes, they all seem correct. And this is how you export it into 3ds Max. Now I'm going to check the same model against, I'm going to not save this. I'm going to check this model also against Rhino. So let me go over here. I'm going to open this with Rhino. By the way, when you open the FBX file, the textures are usually hidden until you open the file. So you will see another folder that contains all the texture mapping swatches that are here. So for example, this is the default sidewalk that InfraWorks is using. These are some of the building textures that are being mapped onto the buildings. These are this is the landscape that is being draped onto the 3D file. Here's the texture for the road that is being mapped onto the roadways. So you get the gist of it. So here I'm going to go ahead and open this same file in Rhino if that is the program that you're working on. So now you can see that the preview has updated with the 3D model of where I left off. I'm going to open this in Rhino, and it should map the texture correctly also in Rhino. So these are the import options in Rhino. I'm going to keep it as default, and I say OK. So you can see that the texture, the wireframe model that we looked at InfraWorks is very similar to what we are going to see here. The wireframe model of the area that I just exported is the same in Rhino here. Again, you can see that all the roadways have been merged into a single object, and all the lane markings are merged into a single object. Because the materials of the rooftops are the same, you can see that it's merged into the same object. And you'll also see that all the sidewalks, because they're the same material, they have been merged into the same object. And if you look at layers, you can see that all these, because it's a single file, even though these are different objects, they're all on the same layer. And I'm going to check that this has been mapped correctly with the textures that we saw that InfraWorks exports here. So I'm going to turn on the view to be rendered. Boom, there we go. Everything has been mapped correctly. You have the roadways, you have the lane markings, everything mapped according to texture correctly. So works correctly in Rhino, works correctly in 3ds Max, and you can use this method to export from InfraWorks to other softwares through the FBX format.